which is, of course, supported by the Friedrich Ebert Stiftung as well as Corvinus University, and is being convened by Marius Taba on my left and Andrew Ryder, who is in the crowd somewhere right now. My name is Michael Miller. I'm a professor at Central European University. I'm the head of the Nationalism Studies program, and I'm also one of the founders of the Jewish Studies program. I'm a historian by training, and I think one of the reasons that Marius probably invited me to chair this panel is because of what I've been working on in the last 6 months or so, together with a colleague at Central European University, Julius Rostas. This past semester, I taught actually a very stimulating course that was called Jews and Roma in Comparative Perspective, where we basically looked at some of the lines, the parallels between Jewish history and Roma history, looking at some of the questions that arise by looking at these two in comparative perspective. It was a very kind of experimental class that I learned quite a bit from, and this was also one of my introductions to Romani studies. Of course, this wasn't my introduction to nationalism studies, which is also, I think, directly related to what we're going to be discussing at this workshop. It is my honor to introduce the two speakers on the first panel. The first panel is called The Roma and Challenging Authoritarian Nationalism. And we have two of the leading scholars in the field that'll be talking about this. One is Bernard Rourke, someone that I have known probably for as long as I've been in Budapest, back in his Open Society days, when Open Society was still in Budapest. As we know, it's just announced that it's leaving. He is currently an advocacy officer for the European Roma Rights Center, ERRC, in Budapest. He worked for the OSF. He's been dealing with Roma-related issues since 1998. He's also the editor of ERRC News. He's a special correspondent for Hope Not Hate, and a regular media contributor and commentator on Roma issues. And we're going to hear from Bernard in a few minutes. I also want to introduce Marius Taba, who I assume I assume both of you in this venue need no introduction. One of the conveners of this conference. He is a visiting scholar at a number of universities here in Budapest, Corvinus University, McDaniel College, as well as ELTE. He works on education, human rights policy development, and public campaigns at grassroots and international level. Originally from Romania and educated at the University of Bucharest, Marius has had extensive experience as a researcher in education and development. He has worked in academia for quite a while, but before working in academia, he worked for the Roma Education Fund, where he was responsible for monitoring and evaluating and implementing projects dealing with education, and has played an important role in the development of education policies for Roma. And I think this is something that Bernard and Marius both share in common, this focus on education programs for Roma, especially in this region. So each of our speakers is going to speak for about 20, maybe 25 minutes. We will have time for Q&A. We have actually extensive time for Q&A afterwards, about an hour for a discussion and a debate. And I think the debate will be heated just because there is no air conditioning. So it'll be heated in many senses. So we have, I think I'll introduce Bernard first.
Thank you very much, and apologies in advance. 20 minutes is a long time to listen to me. The Fundamental Rights Agency released a report last week which actually shines a light on the extent to which Roma face discrimination, harassment, and hate crime. And it shows how anti-Roma racism actively contributes to deprivation in education, employment, living standards, as well as health and housing. This deep-rooted prejudice and structural racism has made marginalization an immiseration of the Roma, socially acceptable among majority populations, who for the most part remain ambivalent and indifferent to the struggles Romani people face. Homes without running water, electricity, lack of health insurance, and even hunger continue to be realities for unacceptable shares of the Roma community in one of the richest regions of the world. Now, considering the Fundamental Rights Agency is an agency of the European Commission, the latest criticism of the framework is quite striking. To get a global perspective on how Roma and the EU compare to the general population in the world, the report takes 3 indicators for a wider comparison in education, employment, and access to clean water and sanitation. Preschool education enrollment of Roma falls below the estimated world average. Roma in Croatia, Czech Republic, Greece and Slovakia are in the group of Ethiopia, Sierra Leone, Burundi, Uzbekistan, and Azerbaijan. When it comes to access to clean and safe water services, the data shows that Roma in Romania enjoy access to safe water in rates similar to those in Bhutan, Ghana, or Nepal. So, the FRA director, the director of the Fundamental Rights Agency, Michael O'Flaherty, describes the manifest inability to honour the human rights of Roma and the levels of deprivation, discrimination and marginalisation of Europe's largest minority as intolerable and a grave failure of law and policy in Europe. So this report makes no bones about the failure of the EU framework to deliver on its promise to make a tangible difference to Roma people's lives. And it confirms what we have argued for years, that without first recognising anti-Gypsyism, anti-Roma racism in all its manifestations, and devising strategies to root this insidious prejudice out from the institutions, the mindsets, the legislatures, from every walk of life that insults the dignity, life and liberty of Romani people, all talk of strategies for growth, social cohesion and 2020, all talk of this kind of integration is nonsense on stilts. Now, for the first 6 months of 2016, Bulgaria holds the EU presidency. Last year, the muted EU response to the appointment of Patriotic Front henchman Valery Simeonov to lead Bulgaria's Council on Integration beggared belief. In an open letter on May 29th, nearly 400 Bulgarian human rights activists and intellectuals denounced the appointment of a pronounced supporter of fascist and neo-Nazi ideology. Simeonov, who was also Deputy Prime Minister, is an upfront, in-your-face fascist who had earlier mused about creating modern concentration camps. In 2016, speaking of Bulgaria's Roma minority and their large families, he told Parliament, "They are brazen, feral, human-like creatures that demand pay without work and collect sickness benefits without being sick. They receive child benefits for children that play with pigs on the street and for women that have the instincts of stray dogs." His party has called for the demolition of gypsy ghettos and the isolation of Roma in closed reservations that could generate income as tourist attractions. Now, in its 2016 assessment of progress, the Commission commended Bulgaria for mobilizing European funding that should allow them to advance with the implementation of soft measures and called for better coordination, monitoring and reporting. Now, from this tepid criticism, you don't get any sense, and a faint praise, that this is a country run by thugs who have abandoned any pretense of civil behaviour or commitment to equity when it comes to its minority populations. The European Commission will have to come up with something more substantive than anodyne observations that better coordination is needed among key stakeholders. The situation of Roma in Bulgaria is worsening. The coarseness of public debate, with its frequent resort to racist hate speech against Roma, migrants and Muslims, And the appointment to high office of thugs who openly espouse fascist views should alert the European Union that there is yet another rogue member state to be reckoned with. As for the major rogue state of the European Union, January 2018 opened with a new declaration of war against civil society from Orbán Viktor. Neighbouring Slovakia announced new repressive police measures and increased powers, specifically targeting Romani communities, while the virulently Eurosceptic and xenophobic Czech president, Miloš Zeman, who recently referred to Roma as inadaptables, won 2 rounds of voting in the presidential elections. The Commission already has 3 infringement procedures on the go against Hungary, Czech Republic and Slovakia for racial segregation, and is racking others up against Hungary for its attacks on media, civil society and Central European University. The buoyant optimism that accompanied the 5th wave of EU enlargement to the new democracies of Central and Eastern Europe has long since evaporated. A combination of political instability and endemic corruption, exacerbated by the neoliberal gift of immiseration and widening inequalities, led to an erosion of trust in democratic institutions. This ambivalence and discontent manifested itself in movements variously described as populist. And a common feature of this profoundly anti-liberal but professedly democratic surge, according to Ivan Krastev about a decade ago, included authentic anger, unrestrained hatred of the elites, cultural conservatism, Euroscepticism, declared nationalism, and undeclared xenophobia. Well, a decade later, the xenophobia is well and truly declared, with much of the so-called authentic anger directed towards Roma, migrants, and other visible minorities. And this resentment has been harnessed by political parties in government and opposition whose bent is better described as nativist authoritarian rather than populist. Prejudice has become a mobilizing force, and unabashed and uninhibited anti-Roma prejudice has taken center stage, with crude ultranationalism as the core ingredients in a wider populist assault on the so-called liberal consensus. Back in 2008, in response to the wave of killings in Hungary, European Commissioner Vladimir Špidla issued a statement urging European Union member states to guarantee the security of their Romani citizens. He said Roma have become the target of organized racist violence fed by political populism, hate speech and media hype, and are being made scapegoats for wider societal problems. Now, when in 2011 the Commission launched the EU framework for national Roma integration strategies, it served as a timely reminder that as far as practical politics is concerned, the primary locus of democratic accountability stubbornly resides within the nation state. To paraphrase Richard Rorty, the governments of our nation states will remain, for the foreseeable future, the principal agents capable of making any real difference in the amount of selfishness and sadism inflicted upon fellow citizens. It remains the case that demands for justice, recognition and redistribution to promote Roma inclusion And combat prejudice matter most when a national government can be called to task to meet its democratic obligations. Now, in the wake of what was referred to yesterday as the French scandal, when Sarkozy launched a campaign to demolish camps and expel Roma en masse back to Romania and Bulgaria, and the Italian nomad emergency initiated by Silvio Berlusconi, the EU found itself forced to step up. In his address at the EU-Roma summit, President Barroso declared, "There is no place for a laissez-faire or business-as-usual approach." Now, the boundless cupidity and reckless stupidity cultivated by laissez-faire, free market fundamentalism, plunged the economies of Europe into severe crisis. If one is to draw an analogy between economy and society, is that in either sphere, nobody can credibly contemplate business as usual. Back in 2008, I warned that a laissez-faire approach to Roma integration, inclusion, could precipitate a profound and deeply corrosive crisis. The threat posed by radical populism needs to be faced and countered in every democratic polity. Further back in 1996, Tony Judd cautioned against the notion that the rise of the Freedom Party under Jörg Haider represented an echo of the ghosts of Europe past. He insisted they stood for something far more ominous. They are the ghosts of Europe yet to come. Now, the ghosts are with us in 2018. There is a crisis, and it is Hungary and Poland, and perhaps Hungary more than Poland, which pose the gravest threat to democracy. Orban's reconsolidated supermajority in the European Parliament has granted him latitude galore in his quest to fashion an authoritarian, ethnically homogenous Christian national state. Describing the EU's refugee policy as a danger to the foundations of Europe's own civilization, the regime has over the years repeatedly saturated the country with publicly funded anti-Muslim and anti-refugee propaganda in a manner that amounts to institutional incitement to racial hatred. Orban has openly championed ethnic homogeneity, described assimilation, the adoption of other languages and mixed marriages as mortal dangers facing the Hungarian nation, and publicly vowed there will be no lawless districts in Hungarian cities, there will be no riots, no refugee camps set on fire, and no gangs will hunt for our wives and daughters. Now, this goes beyond your common or garden varieties of nativism. This is no dog whistle prejudice. This is the blatant, megaphone, in-your-face variety of racism. And it is small wonder that Orban's Fidesz party has long since outflanked the fascist Jobbik party and left it scrabbling for some ostensible raison d'etre. Now, in between these exchanges, Orban managed to make another hate speech on his election campaign trail in the city of Miskolc. And this time the target was Hungary's own Romani citizens. There was a time when people from the outside en masse immigrated into this city, and you remember what happened. The people of Miskolc experienced what happened then, yet those people who moved to Miskolc came from the territory of Hungary. Now you can imagine what will happen when people who in their culture, customs and views are completely different from us arrive from outside the country. And lest there be any doubt, Fidesz publicly confirmed that the Prime Minister was indeed referring to Miskolc's Roma community, who've long endured segregation, discrimination and forced evictions. This recalled another outburst 2 years ago when Orban, in the middle of yet another shameful tirade against Syrian refugees, found a moment to take a racist swipe at his own Romani citizens. Hungary's historical given is that we live together with a few hundred thousands of Roma. This was decided by someone somewhere. This is what we inherited. This is our condition. our situation. We are the ones who have to live with this, but we don't demand from anyone, specifically not in the direction of the West, that they should live together with a large Roma minority. Now, there was little by way of public outrage following this statement, in which the Prime Minister equated Hungary's Romani population with the Syrian refugees, likened his fellow citizens to an historically inherited burden, and spoke of a national we who have to live with them. The Miskolc speech made it clear that Orbán was prepared to play the Roma card without any scruples. Now, the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights recently described Orbán's racist rhetoric as increasingly delusional. The Commissioner stated that to hear such speech, unabashedly expressed by the leader of a modern European country, should outrage every one of us, and that it is time to stand up to bullies of Mr. Orbán's ilk. The increasingly authoritarian, though democratically elected Viktor Orbán, is a racist and a xenophobe. And if the free but not fair election is anything to go by, he is far from alone in Hungary. All this is taking place in a policy environment where all EU member states have signed up to a social integration framework. We face a seeming paradox where increased recognition of Roma as Europe's largest ethnic minority and growing recognition of Romani culture and history at an elite European level goes hand in hand with continuing deprivation, exclusion and racism in cities, towns and villages across the continent. And when it comes to the rights and well-being of children, again, we must insist the primary responsibility lies not with the European Commission, but with the national governments who have ratified the UN Convention of the Rights of the Child and signed up to the EU framework. Many of these governments stand accused of failing millions of Romani children right across Europe. In Italy, Romani children still remain victims of the Berlusconi-inspired state of emergency from years back. The ERC and partners won in the Italian courts to have this nomad emergency suspended and ruled illegitimate. In the course of this emergency, mobs attacked and set camps on fire, mass evictions and deportations of Roma took place, and children were fingerprinted. To this day, thousands of kids still subsist in squalid, segregated, and guarded camps in remote sites across Italy. The human cost of this EU-style apartheid was revealed in reports which found children raised in these camps are prone to a number of severe and debilitating conditions, more frequently born underweight and more likely to become ill with respiratory diseases. And what kind of justice is there for Romani children in Slovakia? In 2015, a judge disallowed video evidence and acquitted 10 Slovak police officers who were charged with torturing the kids at a police station. The release of footage subsequently broadcast on YouTube showed police officers in Košice forcing Romani children to strip naked, kiss and strike one another in the face. Indeed, it prompted the Slovak Spectator to describe the degrading scenes as reminiscent of mistreatment at Baghdad's Abu Ghraib jail. Now that the leaked recording of this incident was ruled inadmissible in court and the case thrown out 5 years later, sends a brutal message to the wider society about what is permissible when it comes to Romani kids. When the former Prime Minister Robert Fico dismissed EU criticism of school segregation by claiming that there is a higher occurrence of genetically determined disorders because Slovak Roma have the highest coefficient of inbreeding in Europe, we heard very little from his comrades in the Socialists and Democrats in Europe. In the 2016 elections in Slovakia, the nominally Social Democratic Smer party, instead of pronouncing on inequality, chose to scapegoat Slovakia's most vulnerable constituency as public support for a far-right political alternative grows. Former Prime Minister Fico blamed the Roma for crime and other social ills, effectively called for extra-legal measures to police their impoverished settlements, and justified his apparent willingness discard constitutionally guaranteed human rights to personal protection by labeling any such concerns as nothing more than political correctness. He had, while he was Prime Minister, referred to journalists who criticize him as anti-Slovak prostitutes. He has said that there is something greatly wrong when the rights of minorities are promoted at the cost of solid Slovak citizens. Now, with all this, a racist rationale takes root in the public consciousness, and ordinary, everyday people simply acquiesce as hearts harden to the suffering of the youngest and most vulnerable of Europe's citizens. That children's fundamental rights are so routinely and egregiously abused is an affront that should inspire outrage among all right-minded citizens, but somehow it doesn't. The nativist authoritarians who promote a friend and enemy rhetoric, a concept of the political, where sovereign is he who decides on the exception, where fellow nationals must be privileged at the expense of everybody else, forges a callous common sense where a profoundly racist mindset becomes taken for granted as simply the way things are. To this day, and despite the EU resolutions, court judgments, UN conventions and the rest, the poorest and most excluded Romani children continue to pay an awful price for this mass acquiescence to the way things are, with little mind to what ought to be. Now, the reason for this public ambivalence and indifference lies in the everyday racism, the routine segregation that prevails in schools, towns and villages, forced evictions that push Roma beyond the city limits, out of sight and out of mind, are just part of a wider history of discrimination, where racist indifference is buttressed by hate speech from political leaders who regularly insult the Roma as an inherently criminal and permanently burdensome, undeserving poor. Beyond 2020, the fight to eliminate anti-Roma racism needs to take pride of place in broad-based political struggles for justice and equality, and children must be at the heart of such struggles, not because the vulnerability of childhood calls upon our compassion, although it should, not because it's a sound investment for the future, although it is, but for a more fundamental reason, because it is their right. Now, in the absence of community-based activism and wider political engagement, the issues and interests of Roma communities will remain marginal to national concerns. The concerns of Roma will remain marginal, routinely ignored. Now, while the rhetoric around Roma participation has undoubtedly improved, the reality at national and local level is that all those commitments and principles of participation have been dishonored more in the breach than in the observance over the last 15 years. I was going to say more, but I won't, because it leaves more time for discussion. But I had many interviews with Roma who decided to become politically active, who decided to engage, to compete for elections. And a common experience among those interviewed was that once inside government structures, many Roma became frustrated to find themselves hamstrung at every juncture. Whereas one politician recalled, all his efforts to collaborate, to communicate, to negotiate were met with internal resistance. Now, while the recounting by Roma of their political experience makes for sobering and salutary reflection, it also stands as an inspiring testament to the grit and determination of politically engaged Roma to compete for public office, to serve not only their communities but the wider public good, and to pursue their ideals with distinction, dogged determination and integrity in the face of often daunting odds. These Roma have risen to the challenge It is time for those from the political mainstream who identify themselves as progressive and liberal, social democratic, even Christian democratic, to respond in a manner that is proportionate and fully inclusive, and in a manner that embraces social justice and does not come with the price tag of assimilation.
Thank you, Michael. Initially, I did the PPT and I tried to be as much as possible scholastic and to take the code of being academic, but I woke up this morning and unless some of our colleagues wants to have more and more academic code, today morning I decided to be back an activist. However, I will start my presentation today with the historical arguments and alignment of the Roma politics and nation creation with the European currents. And I will start because we are just passing 8th of April 1971 when International Roma Day was established. Analyze then, I will pass through the 80s where to my sense it was the era when the neoliberalism worked the most for Roma in terms of rights and some gains in recognition of language, white card and green card recognition by the Council of Europe. Then we have the 90s, the post-communist revolutions and changing from communist to the capitalism back, and where it was kind of a emotion overall in Europe, and Roma occupy an important place into the public agenda and debate. And I will end up with our days, but as a historical point, 2000, and how the shift from human rights and other approaches, cultural rights, identity shifted to social inclusion, poverty, and econometrics and measurements of Roma, I will call it. However, let's start with 1971, when in London, a group of activists from Eastern Europe and Western Europe, they gathered and they had a manifesto to declare for the first time Roma nation. A lot of people, they put this under the emotion of heroism or individuals, but I think it's very important to look what was historically and what were the times of 71 in Europe. 71 came right after the peak of the civil rights movement in America. So it was 50s, 60s, 70s with echoes and reverberation. 71 was after the 60 movement in Europe of students and kind of challenging the old values. 71 came also as a last wave of decolonialization and declare of new independent states in Africa and in a colonial war. So Roma people in 71, they just follow the trend of what was nationalism at that years. And I think this was a success, and I think it was a strategy, and it was the only one time in my understanding when Roma people, activists, I'll say nation builders, align with somehow European currents. What happened after? We had the 80s where Council of Europe and other institutions, they look at the Roma from so-called neoliberalist perspective and trying to give them access or recognition, legal recognition, ending up with 1993 when the Council of Europe acknowledged the Romani language as an official institutional and working language, when other institutions like OSCE and the first turner as a high official of Nicolae Gheorghe, it was also a signal of acceptance and political recognition of Roma. Then a lot of other successes that came there. But what happened there? What happened at the beginning, late 80s and beginning of 90s? Why I'm calling this emotional approach? It was kind of a European senses that the fall of communist bloc, it's a success of neoliberalism. It was a success understood by Americans and by Westerners, the so-called participants of Marshall Plan. Yeah? And they look at Roma and they try to give them all the things that I listed here. Yeah, some political recognition, Roma representatives in different institutions, and occupy, in a way or another, political agenda. It was Professor Lejoie that wrote and steered the gas very well in Council of Europe. Thomas Acton is still here. He also can share with you. But let's keep the discussion into where Roma were, how we developed, and where we are today. What was happening later in the 90s, it was that the conflict in Yugoslavia, but also the wave of migration in Europe, started to make West unhappy. And under the securitization approach, different forms of nationalism and action against Roma started to happen both in the Eastern Bloc and in the Western Bloc. Some of the examples were already mentioned by Bernard, but I also wanted to point you some historiography of how this was developed. Migration. Germany, the pillar of European Union, they were very happy. Berlin Wall was there. They supported a lot Roma projects. The German embassies and the German development funds, they supported a lot Roma movement. However, until the Roma started to migrate in Germany, and then the admission agreements between Romania, Bulgaria, and other countries from the former communist bloc started to be developed, so specifically on Roma. So the readmission wasn't about Romanians and Germans, Romanians in Germany, but Roma. And this was happening in the 93. Then we have Sarkozy. The problem, the French problem didn't start actually in 2000 something, when Sarkozy was the Minister of Interior Affairs, not President of Hungary. He was dealing with the Roma problem in France. Actually, he started in the late 90s, even with people from the French colonies. He wanted to return people back from France into the colonies, even if they were living in France for sometimes 2-3 generations. So this was a taster. This was a thing. Then readmission started in 2002, 2003. I used to work at that time at Romanicus, and we saw and we follow what Sarkozy did that time. What about Switzerland? Do you believe that Switzerland, for instance, in 2008, the country of referendums, they had a specific referendum on Romania and Bulgaria to have readmission treaty and not to accept Roma from Romania and Bulgaria? Again, under the securitization and migration paradigm, they voted in 2008 that Romanians and Bulgaria to come less in Switzerland. All this, it was one paradigm. In 2000, after the Yugoslavian war, another way how Roma were treated, both at the international level and the European level, it was to switch the focus from minority rights, from language, culture, and so-called multiculturalism to poverty and social exclusion. And these two terms, guess what? Social inclusion, it's coming from France. So the term was developed in France as a way to avoid multiculturalism and multilingualism, and say these people need social inclusion. Because France has very big influence on the European Union, the term was easily adopted by the European Commission and other international players. So why I'm saying this, it is that nationalism and the international agenda towards Roma had in different times different faces, and today we are in a position to not have a clear direction. So if history might give us an answer, today even our conference, it's called and it has on its name chaos, in the time of chaos. I do believe that today we are in the time of chaos, and I will really go to our days. Kasmude, a political scientist and public commenter, he's very positive about the direction of general European politics, and he's saying that populism and authoritarianism, it's almost over in Europe. What he's doing, he's looking at the last wave of election, and he's counting the victories of neoliberalist and centrist people from Netherlands. For instance, he said that falling of Wilders, it's a success and it was a good signal. He is also looking at Macron and all the presumably victories of neoliberalism, and regardless of their political orientation. But my question it is, and I wanted to keep in mind this, it is that, okay, if you look at input and output of elections and the victories, Kasmude, it's very, very right. So he has data about this. But my question it is that those people that are radicalized, those people that they voted and supported the authoritarian, they remain there in a country. They are in the institutions, they are running banks, they are running schools, they are running, and we encounter them every single day. How and what we do post-election? how we have in a public education system, in the so-called civic education system, how we work with those people that they are there. And in this regard, I'm sharing with you a graph from 2015. It's a pool which shows that in Western countries, northern countries, the so-called pillars of democracy and stability of Europe, still Roma, Muslim, black people, gay, and Jewish, in the public opinion, it's a problem. So people still can suffer that. So where are Roma in this? You see, they are champions. Maybe it's not representative, and I'm in a university, but I am pretty sure that with the margins of error, these are the trends. Maybe the percentage are not there, but you can click, and I give you the source, and see the sampling and the data, how was collected, and all the things. So you can go to the source. But I'm giving you this just as a trend. Now, we are here. Yeah. This is
The question is simple. What can you tell them? What is the
58% of Roma do not accept to have vicinity, or they consider that Roma can be discriminated. And then by Muslims, black people, gay, so it's the level of discrimination in the countries. And accepted discrimination and revealed. To come to our days, why it's what is another question. So what we do with non-Roma, it's a legitimate question, and we are based on our citizenship rights, we can do that. But I wanted to raise with you the second question: what we are doing as Roma, how today politics of Roma it's matching or mismatching with the European trends of nationalism and politics of identity. However, a group of our people started an academic, Roma people, started an academic program, and also European level institution to answer the populism and the politics of identity with a policy of identity, Roma culture, heritage, and so on and so forth. The question is this appropriate? Is it the same case and strategy that has been used by our people in 1971 when they followed the trend and they took the advantages of the political trends in Europe, and like a surfer they break through the wave, and today we are able to celebrate International Roma Day. Is it today the politics of identity practiced by the Roma leadership beneficial? Is there a risk analysis how this is conflicting with the general politics? These are the questions that I wanted to debate with you. These are maybe the opportunity to reflect more how Roma will position politically. Are we, if we take the paradigm of power from Michel Foucault, is our days Roma politics counterbalancing the power of general politics? Are they equipped? Do we have, I would say, even diplomatic skills to make it? What are the tools? A lot of questions. So I will try also to close with reflection about Brubaker work, where it's looked at the opportunity to have the so-called transraciality concept. So this is knowledge production that try to, under the neoliberalism and under the human rights and freedom of choice and so on and so forth, the new scholars, they try to say that race, ethnicity doesn't count in a politics and doesn't count our days. It's the so-called transracial politics. So I think that's another extreme of the paradigm what today our leadership is trying to do with the politics of identity. So I give you two extremes. So people that are practicing the politics of identity and ethnicity and cultural pride and so on and so forth. And then on the other hand, we have Brubaker that tries to erase the racial and ethnic inherited and telling that at the end it's a personal choice and politics of identity and ethnicity actually doesn't make too much sense. Thank you very much for joining us, and we are open for questions. I know that by myself I raised some very difficult questions, but let's try to debate and to reflect about them. Thank you.
Thank you to both of our speakers for interesting and I think also provocative talks. We have a considerable amount of time right now for discussion, questions and answers. I'm going to take the prerogative as chair maybe to ask the first question or first question or two. A question for Bernard. Your talk was basically a sustained broadside attack against the right, populist right, but then at the end you had fairly strong words for the Social Democrats, for the liberal parties, in a talk that was dealing primarily with what you called nativist authoritarianism, right? So to what extent? So how would you evaluate the missed opportunities or the negligence, or how would you characterize this of the left? Because I think it's fairly easy to attack the populist right here. It's fairly easy to assign blame there, but it seemed like in the last 30 seconds or so of your talk, you were really redirecting the blame, and I want you to clarify that a little bit.
Over the last 20 years, I will accuse the liberal and left parties of Europe of consciously and willfully neglecting to address Roma inclusion. It's very easy to pass resolutions in Strasbourg or Brussels, but take it home to your sister parties in Bratislava, in Sofia, and indeed in London. I remember Robin Cook, the Labour minister, who made a name for himself calling for an ethical foreign policy. He was dismayed that Czech Roma were being granted political asylum in the United Kingdom, and he vowed to send those Czechs bouncing back. He said, "We will not accept your false claims," and he vowed to close that loophole. His ethical foreign policy did not extend to recognizing what the courts did at the time. The Czech Roma were suffering from segregation, exclusion, and an alarming rate of physical violence visited upon them by neo-Nazis, skinhead gangs at the time. Robert Fico, now no longer prime minister, but for so many years the strongman of Slovakia, is a member of the Socialists and Democrats, who on many occasions has made openly racist comments about his fellow citizens. The Smer party was never expelled from the Socialists and Democrats for any anti-Roma racism. Many of the so quite apart from the racism, many of the social democratic parties became enthusiastic free marketeers, actively cutting back on state provision and absolving the states from many of their public responsibilities. So they're indistinguishable from members of the centre-right in their enthusiasm for austerity. We had a peculiar situation where at the same time the European Commission was calling for redistribution and funds to be used to alleviate poverty, we had the most harshest austerity measures imposed upon member states by that very same Commission, emboldened by being part of a troika. So I think, and we have seen candidates from socialist parties at a local level who not only do they avoid Roma issues because it's not a vote winner, but they've actively, in competing for that overcrowded middle ground and desperate attempt not to be outflanked by extremists, have engaged in racist conduct. Manuel Valls was there on the slide, and he said he would chase these people back to the borders. They can never integrate with a French way of life. I expect little from right-wing authoritarians, but as a social democrat, I expect more from my erstwhile comrades. So across, another point is that many social democrats have never been very good with diversity. They're good at establishing bonds of solidarity with fellow citizens who are just like them. And historically, it has been a blind spot that social democracy has thrived in the more homogeneous political environments. It needs to dress itself up again and embrace a notion of the common good and a sense of common belonging that is not predicated upon assimilation.
So this draws me to my next question, which I think is actually for both of you. If we look at the statistics that Marius brought, there seems to be a kind of consensus in Western Europe. The way that if we were to, I think if we replace Muslim with refugee or migrant, we would probably have similar kinds of results. But there is a growing consensus, let's say in Hungary, that even on the left, or the opposition, the left/liberal opposition to Fidesz, that migration and refugee questions are somehow untouchable. Right, that there is a growing consensus that none of the political parties actually want to take on. None of them want to take a moral, ethical position. They seem to be following a xenophobic / racist consensus. Is there some sort of consensus that you're sensing here, just from these, I guess, again, not particularly scientific data that you brought? You said, is there some sort of consensus? If there is a growing consensus that spans the political spectrum, so what are the solutions? Because I think both of your papers actually sort of showed a collapsing of the differences when it comes to questions of Roma, and I assume a similar kinds of collapsing of differences, maybe to less extreme, when it comes to refugees and migrants. So are these political distinctions actually becoming somewhat meaningless?
Thank you, Michael. Indeed, I think our days politics, it's getting very interesting, and I think when it's about populism, authoritarianism, and the mechanisms that they are using, they're simple. So it's the politics of otherness, which doesn't have right or left dimension or doctrinary face, to say so. However, in the discussion with Professor Gilborn some years ago, there is a tendency that nationalism and populism, it's not anymore an attribute to a right-wing party, small, somewhere there. And I will give you two examples to epitomize this. So first, it's Romania, where actually the well-recognized right-wing party disappeared. Guess what? The ruling party absorbed this electorate, so he's there. So this is again argument of the statistics. So they don't disappear. The people that are radicalized, they don't disappear. They just wait for the momentum to be awakened. So it's a sleeping body, but it's not a dead a body of voters. What's happening here? Let's take Jobbik. So if the Jobbik was the scarecrow for Roma, and you know they have from a paramilitary action till political openness, the electorate is stolen by Orban. So a lot of electorate of Jobbik, somehow it shifted to the ruling party. What Jobbik did? Jobbik was the defender of CDU, if you remember, yeah? So it's
not the defender.
No, but not the, yeah. What it's my understanding about the politics towards racism and hatred, that it doesn't have our days doctrinary version. And I'm having here a citation from Habermas, which says that Europe is also increasingly prey to seductive populism from Orban and Kaczynski, Le Pen and EFD from Germany. Does they mean that we are going through the period of making irrational politics? And I think here I would agree with him, because the ethnical politics, it's irrational, it's emotional. And I will add here as a tool the internet and the so-called social media playing role in radicalizing people and dropping the hate in their souls and brains. And you know that from America till Europe, social media is starting to play a very important role with fake news and so on and so far. And it doesn't have any more a doctrinary line. So, continuing the a quote from Habermas, he's saying that right-wing populism with left-wing populist version is the same. So, populism, to my sense, it doesn't have a full doctrinary. And to close, I'll give you the example of Wilders from Netherlands. So he didn't come with a doctrinary. His political platform was 1 page or so, 2 pages. So he then came with a logic argument. He just played emotionally, saying that let's have Netherlands back to ours. Let's not. So he played the politics of otherness, but didn't come with a solid arguments and with real rational politics.
In terms of questions, I see that there are a number of people that are wearing headphones, and I'm not sure what the policy of the conference is. Can the questions be asked in Hungarian as well as okay? So questions can be asked or comments can be made in Hungarian or in English. I think.
There is a mobile mic.
And before asking a question, please introduce yourselves.
I am from Master Code, an intern in Corvinus. My question is more general, not particular to the presentations. In your opinion, what do you think are the major challenges from the side of minorities, in this case, the Roma people, in the process of integration in their respective countries. Because as I understand from the yesterday's and today's presentation, it's more of from the side of the non-Romanis, the institutions, the majorities, not like from the side of the minorities.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Which,
So, just to make sure if I understand your question. So, what do you mean about this? So, be short. What exactly you mean?
Okay, what I mean is,
Yeah.
what do you think are the major challenges from the very people that are supposed to be integrated? In this case, the Romani people. For instance, in the form of resistance to the policies presented by the European Union or the respective national states.
Very good question, but that's why I wanted to make sure that this is what you mean. So, in terms of policies, my answer will be a tautological definition of anti-Gypsyism or anti-Roma. There are people that are using the term Romophobia, which I totally disagree with it, because at least there is no definition, and it's if we look at it from the securitization perspective, it's not like Islamophobia. Yeah. So on the contrary, Roma, and here I will answer you, they are victims of different policies and politics, historically speaking, and anti-Gypsyism, can be tautologically defined from the way how the state implement policies, or sometimes non-implementation of policies, brought the Roma into this situation. So we have at least a line where the Roma are there. Now the question it is that the Roma are resistant. I must say no, and I'll give you two examples. One is the school segregation, and second, the housing segregation. However, I'll give you example how, for instance, in Bulgaria, segregation it's a result of a communist policy of integration. During the 50s, the Communist Party from Bulgaria, they tried to settle and to integrate Roma in Bulgaria by creating separate neighborhoods. So in Bulgaria, you have the main municipality, and then you have satellites or neighborhoods, which usually there is a physical distance between them, but as an administration was developing, they belong to the main municipality. What the communists did, they did with a good intention. They said like that, one of these satellites should be Roma. What they did, they provided them school. They have programs for adult literacy and so on and so forth. And with a good intention, they create enclaves that today are there. With a good intention, the schools that are in these enclaves, by definition, they were tokenistically developed, saying that the Roma will get basic education, and afterwards they will be absorbed by the socialist industry. So it was even providing them school, work, an entire set of policy, well intended. What we have today, we have the highest number of school segregation in Bulgaria as a result of one politics of sedentarization and integration of Roma. Can we talk there about the resistance? I think no. The same with housing. So if you look at the pattern of housing of Roma, why do you think that Roma chose to live at the margin or outskirts of villages and cities? No, it's exactly it's explaining in a way or another some policies, but also it's explained the so-called level of tolerance of non-Roma towards Roma. So nothing is happening. So now I will answer you with a simple logic. Who wants to stay aside? Who wants to have lower education attainment? Who wants to have lower income? Who doesn't want to have access to water? What Bernard mentioned as human rights. And yesterday you saw that the students and the people from local people, they show that in Hungary today we have Roma households without electricity, which is a basic of a modern world. Is this a result of resistance, or is this a result of state policy? Let's debate.
More and more of these Roma will have to be prepared to live normal lives and be integrated. It seemed to have escaped our notice that hundreds of thousands of Roma across Europe are leading normal lives and doing the best they can. She had, in that unguarded moment, revealed a racialized mindset that there were hordes of Roma who refuse to integrate, as you say, who desire not to have access to clean and safe water and sanitation, who desire to live knee-deep in mud. The amnesia, the political amnesia that would allow a remark like that to slip out spoke volumes. Now, I remember the goddaughter of a shift worker who left his home in the Roma settlement to go to work at the same time every night, which meant he was an easy target for snipers. He was shot to death, and his goddaughter said, "It seems like nothing we do is good enough for the non-Roma." She was educated, university educated. She'd worked on Roma inclusion, on Roma integration. She was an active citizen, and still it was not enough. The notion, again, and it's within sort of benign liberal mindsets, that somehow this is a Roma problem, when it is a problem of the majority society. The acceptance that poverty is something that happens to people rather than the deliberate outcome of policies of segregation is again an indication of how deeply sort of neoliberal hegemony has sort of penetrated the mindset. People think that people have become poor because of a combination of unfortunate happenings or their own fecklessness, rather than a sort of structured, there's nothing incidental or accidental. So the notion that when they talk about integration, I mean, really what they talk about is assimilation. We want you to look more reassuringly like us and behave in ways that reassure us, because they have assumed the ethnic majorities in these countries, be they Czech, be they Slovak, be they Croat, whatever their troubled history and whatever conflicts have brought those states into being, they assume they are the norm. And it is against that norm that you must be measured. So, there is a capacity to resist, and we see it every day in litigants that come forward. Women who will not accept being racially abused while they give birth, will not accept being threatened that their children will be taken away from them if they scream too loudly. Women who have refused to accept that the Czech and Slovak states will not apologize or compensate them for coercive sterilization. Romani villagers who, when they were attacked by Slovak policemen on the flimsiest of pretexts, recorded those attacks and submitted them to us so we could pursue with them to pursue justice. So yes, there are many acts of everyday resistance, and assimilation is not, as I say, the price tag for acceptance and recognition of human rights.
Lakatosné Danon Zsuzsanna vagyok, és ugye itt mint aktivista. Rendszerváltás óta motoszkál bennem az, hogy meg folyamatosan ezt halljuk, hogy integráció. Egyszer valaki mondja már meg, hogy mi az, hogy integráció, mit várnak el a romáktól és más kisebbségektől, hogy most integrálódjanak? Mert nekem valószínű mást jelent ez a szó, mint a jelenlegi kormánynak vagy a többségi társadalomnak, de az is lehet, hogy még az itt ülők közül is teljesen más számomra az integráció. Tehát néha nem ártana leülni, és mielőtt az integrációról beszélünk, elmondani, hogy nekem mit jelent ez a szó. Most asszimilálódnunk kell, vagy integrálódnunk? Hova integrálódjunk? Rendszerváltás óta Magyarországon, és ugye amikor az Unióba beléptünk, akkor is jött, hogy na most a magyarországi cigányok olyan integránsok lesznek, hogy ihaj-csuhaj. Jöttek be a magyar millió dollárok, vagy bocsánat, eurók, és aztán a vége az lett, hogy hozzánk, kis emberekhez ténylegesen nem jutott el. Tehát akkor mi az, hogy integrálódni? Kérdezem én, hogy én akkor most integrálódva vagyok? Ugye még a rendszerváltás előtt szakmunkát szereztem, sütőipari szakmunkást az átkos kommunista rendszerbe, amit én azóta is igenis visszasírok. Viszont utána 36 évesen esti gimibe kerültem. Akkor most én integrálódva vagyok? Diplomát szereztem. Integrálódva vagyok? Ha integrálódva vagyok, az én unokám miért nem mehet abba az iskolába, ahova mi szeretnénk? Akkor ez most integráció, vagy nem? Vagy a magyar társadalom és bárhol a többségi társadalom azt várja tőlünk, hogy integrálódjunk, de ugyanakkor elzárják előlünk az integráció lehetőségét, az oktatási integráció. Hogy akarják, hogy bármi előre haladjon, ha közben olyan intézkedéseket hoznak, mint Balogh úr is, hogy joga van ahhoz, hogy azt mondja, hogy egy iskolába igenis lehet szegregálni, mert hogy ez a... Milyen szegregáció ez a... Szeretetteljes szegregáció, és főleg az egyházi iskolák teszik ezt. Hogy egyeztethető össze a szeretet szelleme, Jézus szelleme az egyházi iskolákban akkor, amikor a legelesettebbeket elnyomják, az asztaltól holott iszonyú okos, értelmes gyerekeink vannak, de aztán azt mondják, hogy nincs értelme integrálódni, bár ők nem tudják, hogy mit jelent, mert akkor sem kaphatok munkát. Marius azt mondta, hogy az oktatás és a lakhatás, de én idehozom az egészségügyet, idehozom a munkahelyi dolgokat is. Ha folyamatosan elszeparálnak, szegregálnak, hogy asszimilálódjunk, mit tegyünk? Tényleg menjünk, sterilizáltassuk magunkat, de akkor írják már le törvénybe, hogy mit várnak el tőlünk, és aztán csinálják, amit a pályázatoknál, hogy oké, megvolt, ezt sterilizáltuk, oké, ezt beintegráltuk, vagy nem tudom, tehát akkor legyen már valami valóban nyílt, őszinte kommunikáció, hogy mit várnak el tőlünk romáktól, vagy az országunkban élő más kisebbségektől, mert nem csak mi vagyunk elnyomva, hanem minden más kisebbséggel van. Annyi különbséggel, hogy nekik azért az anyaországok azt mondja, hogy enye, a romáknak akárhol a világban nincs anyaországok, és nincs, aki felszólaljon. És ezért van az szerintem, hogy az Unió is csak látszatintézkedéseket hoz. Egy nagyon egyszerű példa. A Roma az Unióból indult el, az Európa Bizottság és az Európa Tanács hozta létre, hát szépen kiképeztek minket interkulturális roma mediátornak. Fú, mindenki azt hitte, hogy na, akkor ezzel most megváltjuk a világot Magyarországon, én is. És aztán, mikor oda került a sor, nemhogy minket nem fizettek meg, önkéntes munkát vártak ugyanúgy tőlünk. De ha egyszer nincs presztízsünk, akkor hogyan? Hogyan integrálódjunk, ha bármit megteszünk, akár az Uniónak is, nem kapjuk meg a megfelelő elismerést semmilyen módon. Tehát ezt nem értem. Beszéljünk az integrációról, de mondjuk el, hogy mi az. Köszönöm.
I can only say I fully agree with everything you said. The Ministry of Lies reports annually to the European Commission that Fidesz has done more for the Roma than anybody else. And the European Commission dutifully sits back and says, thank you. There are within the Commission people who don't believe that and who go on the ground and investigate. Integration was defined many, many years ago as a two-way, open-ended process between minorities and so-called majority populations. An open-ended negotiation to establish bonds of trust and shared belonging, not of a majority imposing its ways upon a minority. An open-ended process of mutual recognition and respect, not willful assimilation and racist denigration of fellow citizens. And I accuse Minister Balogh of being I can't speak for Jesus, but I can say that this man of God is mendacious, would be the word I use. It's a polite word for liar. He has said that he hasn't decided whether segregated or integrated education is better for Romani children or not. It's not up to him to decide. International jurisprudence has said that discrimination is illegal. He said he favors catch-up classes. During communism, the whole notion of catch-up classes was discredited as a stupid waste of money. But yet, Minister Balogh wants to revive this. Catch-up classes are where nobody ever catches up. It is another way to maintain racial segregation. As for his loving segregation under the eyes of God, his God, the notion that religious-run schools are exempt from anti-discrimination provisions in law, that they can run segregated schools, and also that they receive funding to run elite schools, white-only schools, is a damning indictment of both church and state. All over the world, elected governments are doing everything they can to put as much distance between Roman Catholic priests and children. And here in Hungary, they're being thrown together and heavily subsidized to do so. So integration, what they mean, integration will always be a loaded word. We opposed it when the European Commission decided to call these integration strategies because it is loaded with a meaning of assimilation. So I repudiate the term because it will not be understood in the way in my humble opinion, the way it should be understood. And thank you, I fully agree with you.
Before you answer, I just have a question. Since we're getting to terminology, maybe you could also clarify how inclusion is generally used in policies, in the policy world, and how it's distinguished from integration, because this is a term that's often used synonymously.
These are slippery words and often used interchangeably by the same people. In fact, the use of both terms is so promiscuous that it ceases to have any clear defining. But I would prefer inclusion to integration if I had to speak to policy. There has to be a word for what we're doing. If somebody is excluded, clearly, if we think of exclusion as the opposite, well then, no right-minded person wants to champion racial exclusion, social exclusion. So in terms of its opposite, inclusion is probably a preferable term, but I would again use the same definition that I have before, that when we talk about inclusion, it is an open-ended process of negotiation that is about mutual respect, recognition, and the idea being to foster an egalitarian shared sense of belonging.
Yeah, I fully agree with your statements, and I would answer your question shortly and academic with the concept of power and Foucault and how the terms of integration and the standards are defined by the state. Second concept is the cultural reproduction of Pierre Bourdieu, where school and state it's trying to reproduce the majority culture, and this is becoming a standard. So school doesn't have the mandate to make us Roma, but the school is paid and controlled by the state to create Hungarian citizens. So these are the academic and paradigmical answer. Second, I wanted to share with you a feeling about being mediator and how the integration is seen at the local level. And I had the experience to meet more than almost 200 mayors all over the Balkans in the last decade. Going there as a monitoring and evaluation officer, as a control guy, to see what's happening there. Are they integrated, these kids? Are they not integrated? I encountered two attitudes from the local authorities. And here it's your answer. Who defines what is integration, what not? First attitude, it was that the mayors would look at us saying, very admiratively, saying, wow, guys, you are here. You are our save. Oh, how we can do for these poor people. Give us a panacea, give us a solution right now. So this admirative statement. Second, it was kind of a crying attitude saying, you know, we invested so much money into these schools and we painted the walls and we did a lot of investment. We attracted structural funds and so on and so forth. But with this Roma, it's very difficult to work. And the third story, it is with the Slovak Ministry of Education, we were in a position to negotiate with them a partnership and a project for a long run. And guess what? From high-level official of Slovak Ministry, they ask a reward, a laptop for all the teachers, saying that this will be a reward for their extra efforts of working with Roma kids. So who's defining the integration? The powerful ones. And this is the attitude, and I know. So I'm not answering you from ivory tower of academy, but I share with you and I can give you names, localities, pictures, and monitoring reports. This are with me. Thank you.
So I wanted to ask a question. This is for all. Oh, I'm Marco Petzak, Research Officer at Roma Education Fund. I wanted to ask, this is a question mainly related to Bernard's presentation, but would like actually to hear from all of you, is that we're hearing a lot about what's happening, the extreme racism and the move towards populism and the right wing, and how it's not just become institutional racism, but flat out racism and hate. But I think for us, what might be good is if you think of what are some solutions and opportunities that we can grab now to combat this, and that we need to that we need to really capture now to really push against this trend.
There have been volumes of recommendations, and every report comes complete with, studied sort of recommendations about what is to be done. And we never give up, we persist. And these recommendations are all echoed by the Council of Europe, United Nations. When it comes to schooling, for instance, we can recommend that they should be cultivating a respectful environment where Romani children are not degraded and humiliated every day. We can recommend, as the Roma Education Fund, how access to early childhood education can smooth the entry into primary school, how providing supports in upper primary can cut down the dropout rate between primary and secondary school. We can make all these recommendations, but without being profane, well, without expletives, I'll say who's listening. And that's it's not about the recommendations. There's no mystery. It's not rocket science how to respect your neighbor. To combat racism and prejudice means we have to be active every day in everything we do. It means that everyday acts of solidarity actually matter. It means that we should not should never become fatalist in the face of electoral defeats, in the face of setbacks. It means we have to recover civility in the public sphere in days of in the sort of whether it's in private or public, to counter every racist act, word, deed. So it calls on us not to be fatalist. It calls on us to recover a sense of, for those that have, many of us have never lost it, but to encourage a wider sense of civic responsibility that and shared citizenship, something that trumps. So the recommendations, the technical recommendations about clean water. I mean, look, we're in the richest part of the world. You should be able to turn on a hot tap. You should be able to walk to school in a paved surface, not a muddy surface, and then be told when you get to school that you're covered in mud, you're too dirty to come into class. None of these, so we don't need, we provide all the, dutifully provide all the recommendations about what is to be done, what needs to be done. They are clear and they're self-evident. A 10-year-old can tell you what he or she needs to make her life better. So it's not, the notion that there's some mystery recommendation, some missing link. No, it is sort of a combination of deeply rooted prejudice, inertia, indifference, and a notion among everyday people who are non-Roma that somehow the fate of the Roma is not a shared fate, that we're not citizens together. So all the recommendations in the world, until we cultivate respect, and it is the responsibility of those who lead us politically for this not to be an afterthought on their agenda, the way gender equity used to be. That when it comes to racist exclusion, when it comes to sort of acute deprivation and poverty, I heard yesterday a former commission official say how wonderful it was that a kindergarten was built in Lunik 9. In January last year, 5 children died by fire and ice because they were living in squats and shacks after the blocks in Lunik 9 had been demolished. So hip hip hooray for the commission building a kindergarten in Lunik 9, but we got no official apology. No measures were taken that further children would not die because of fire and because of extreme cold in January in Slovakia. So it's not to diminish the excellent work being done by bureaucrats and technocrats, but there's no mystery. In short, there's no recommendation that has not been made in all the priority areas. We keep making them again and again, but the reason lies elsewhere.
Yeah, and maybe I wasn't looking for clear recommendations. I was looking at more of like actions that we at this table should either think about or do or focus on, kind of what you alluded to of like everyday practices, everyday acts, but maybe even more specific as collectively, like within all of our roles, what can we do?
I may follow up and I will try to make it sure. So I will use the paradigm of citizenship, and I will state that this hatred against Roma, against Jewish, and so on and so far, one day will touch upon the white people. When I'm saying this, I would give you an example of this country. So if they started with Roma, they continue with Jewish, they create enemy, George Soros. Tomorrow will become other institutions. A day after tomorrow will be too late. So we have to look at the history that hatred, populism, and authoritarianism, it's functioning like a snowball. So as the time it's passing, if it's not stopped, it's growing and growing and growing. And one day will touch the entire population in a way or another. And this is a message that we have to share with our fellows, that one day would be too late. They would say it's uncontrollable, this guy. And we have 70 years ago almost the same atmosphere in Europe, and we have a guy that did it out of the control.
I'm looking around the table. It would be very presumptuous of me to suggest what we should do, because people around the table often spend every waking hour of their lives doing precisely what you said, and in so many different spheres and so many different ways. People here, like people at other meetings, have been doing everything within their power, as well as meeting their other responsibilities in life, to make the country a better, more respectful public space. So it would be arrogant of me to suggest here's things other people who, when they've been doing it all their lives.
Yelena?
Please introduce yourself.
Elnézést kérek, Buza Károly vagyok, és hát az a baj, hogy én az egész beszélgetem picit ingerült vagyok, és lehet, hogy nem fogalmazok úgy, ahogy kellene. Nagyon tetszett, hogy én szerintem egy 10 éves gyerek is meg tudja fogalmazni, egy roma gyerek meg tudja fogalmazni, hogy mi kéne, vagy mit kellene csinálni. Benne vagyunk egy projektben, amit ugyancsak mi csinálunk Bakson, amiben épp ezt mutassuk be, hogy egy 10 éves vagy 12 éves gyerek, roma gyerek, telepi gyerek mit szeretne. Ugye sajnos ezt a kisfilmet meg van csinálva, de még nem mutathatjuk be, mert most beszerettem volna mutatni, és ott válaszokat kaphattunk volna, és nem tanulmányok, és nem milliós tanulmányokban, hanem simán egy 10 éves gyerek meg tudja fogalmazni. Egy roma gyerek, hogy mit szeretne együtt élni a magyarsággal, integrálódni szeretne, jó szeretné magát érezni, színészkedni, vagy bármit meg tudjon tenni, amit más. Ennyi az egésznek a lényege, és ez nem kell európai tanulmányokba, nem kell milliárdokat költeni ezekre a dolgokra. Egyszerű 10 éves gyerek meg tudja mondani, hogy mit jelent az integráció. Nem kell hozzá egyetemi dolog, mint nekem is van, nem kell hozzá diploma, nem kell hozzá semmi. 10 éves gyerek meg tudja mondani. Tehát én szerintem ez a kisfilm erre választ adna. Ez készen van. Csinálunk több kisfilmet, szívesen mi is bemutatjuk ezt a dolgot, és ingyen, és mi pénz nélkül. Tehát ez szívesen bárkinek, bármikor szeretettel várunk mindenkit, és ha esetleg forrást is hoznak, azt még nagyon megköszönjük, mert a gyerekeknek így jobb lesz, és 40-50 gyerekről van szó, és nem csak ott, hanem bárhol szívesen csinálnánk ezt a dolgot. Nagyon szépen köszönöm.
All I could say is, pontosan és köszönöm szépen, because you're absolutely right.
Akkor én magyarul mondom. Ami szerintem nagyon fontos, Vajda Violetta vagyok, bocsánat. Ami szerintem nagyon fontos az, amit a Jenő talán a tegnap délután posztolt az interneten, ha barátok vagytok vele Facebookon, akkor szerintem nézzétek meg. És ő arról posztolt, hogy most a választások után nyomban a balliberális elit már elkezdte bűnbaknak kezelni a roma közösségeket. És már régebben a Zsuzsával együtt voltunk egy másik projektben, amelyiken részt vettünk roma és nem roma csoportokkal, és ott nagyon nyilvánvaló volt, hogy nagyon liberális, nagyon nyitott eszű emberek, amikor romákkal, és pontosabban olyan romákkal, akik nem tudom, hogy fogalmazzam, de nem azt érzik, hogy azon az elit vonalon mozognak, mint ők, konkrétan nem tudnak együtt dolgozni. Nem, hogy nem akarnak, nem veszik észre, hogy egymással igenis együtt dolgoznak, de a roma közösségekkel nem. És lehet, hogy amit a Jenő már nagyon rég mond, hogy a legnagyobb problémánk az, hogy nem tudunk szembenézni azzal, hogy mi elitek vagyunk, én például, és hogy nekünk vannak forrásaink, és azokat a forrásokat tényleg nem osszuk meg, amikor kell. Szóval amikor úgy érzük, hogy például most, amikor azok, akik elvesztették a választásokat, úgy érzik, hogy nincsenek komfortban, nagyon, nagyon sokan tehetetlenek, el vannak veszve, és nem tudják tovább gondolni, hogy most kellene az ő forrásaikat tovább megosztani azokkal, akiknek nincsenek meg azok a források, és nagyon pici dolgokra gondolok, hogy például akkor, amikor megígértük, hogy együtt dolgozunk valamin, akkor nem hagyjuk cserbe az embereket, és nem kerül fontosabb dolgunk. És amikor valamit tudunk segíteni, hogy valakit elviszünk egy autóval valahova, akkor elvisszük azt az embert oda, vagy amikor azt halljuk, hogy valaki nem tudod valahova elérni, vagy nem tudta megérteni azt a nyelvet, vagy akkor tolmácsolunk neki. Szóval ilyen nagyon apró dolgokon múlik szerintem, és nagyon sokszor szembenézünk ezekkel a dolgokkal, hogy amikor összejövünk rómákkal és nem rómákkal, akkor nagyon elmegy a figyelme a nem róma embernek arra, hogy neki jó és komfortos legyen, és ne égjen ki, no burnout. Úgyhogy szerintem itt vannak, és figyeljetek a Jenőre, Jenő tényleg megmond dolgokat. Ja, és még egy dolog, amikor olyan emberek, mint a Jenő, erőteljesen felszólalnak, és megmondják, hogy ők mit gondolnak, nagyon sokszor tapasztaltuk, hogy akik végighallgatják, megrémülnek, elmennek, félnek, akkor kellene meghallgatni.
Yeah, but this is a simple mechanism used by the so-called scapegoat, yeah? And we have it in Romania. So today, Roma, under the paradigm of being lazy, and they are accused that actually they are supporting the socialist government that is governing Romania, and saying that Roma and the poor and the lazy people voted by default with the socialists. So again, I think the politics of hate and nationalism based on ethnicity and the otherness doesn't have a political doctrine. And it's just the politics of hate. Create the others and throw the guiltness and labeling them. So I'm not surprised that now the losers of the election, they are pointing the finger to Roma, saying that they lost because of them. So it's a mechanism that it has been used in the ghettos in Slovakia. I told you, I met mayors and I saw sometimes they say, I don't want to help them with schooling and that because last Monday they were voting with my opposition and so on and so forth. So yes, Roma are victims of political games. That's why I think that they should empower and play a real politic. And it's a lot to do in this regard. So this is more or less a reflection rather than going and crying and saying, well, the politicians are pointing a finger to us. I think this has to be a message to mobilize Roma to be real political players.
I'm Yelena, I'm coming from CU, I'm a student there. And I just want to say that I think that it's in the nature of the event, basically, to speak in this way as we do now, about the Roma being the ones who are the victims in the story, and without really any kind of questioning this kind of position. And I'm not going to question that in some major way. I would just like to ask you, when you speak, Bernard, for example, about Roma leadership, you speak as if it's morally impeccable. And I understand this, and I think it's really important, in a way, to have this kind of really strong celebratory kind of narratives about Roma who are, should be recognized as victims and who suffered. And this is all fine in some way. But as you said, for last, I don't know how long, like very long, things are not really working. Nobody's listening. And we all participate in a certain kind of way in the system. And I have a feeling that something is wrong, but that we are not really addressing the key points in some way. And I'm just trying to find some kind of, for me, for example, it was very useful to hear the stories which are very practical, like the example with the solar panels and stuff like that. And maybe that's something that I find like tangible. And in political arena, I maybe it's good. Maybe it's just me, and I'm not really informed, and there are a lot of good examples. But maybe that's the way to go and to see where what we do right. That's one thing, and surely we do something right? But also, I would ask you if you could, in this kind of events, focus more on the things that we actually do wrong. Because there must be something that we do wrong, obviously. I don't know. I mean, it's just my feeling that there is something missing. And I don't want to be judgmental, or I don't want to be like a pain in the ass, how to say. Right? And this is just an open call to be free to be critical towards ourselves also. Yeah, that's all.
When it comes to the sphere of politics, I have been forthright, have named names, and where Romani politicians, either in league with governing parties, have mismanaged huge amount of money that should have gone to bridge to employment schemes, money that was misappropriated, money that has been disappeared. We have named the names and we have called out these people. For any politicians in the past that were involved with gangsters, basically, they were called out in the past. The political people I was speaking to were young Roma who had, against the odds, decided to pursue a political career and who do so with integrity. It wasn't a scientific, it wasn't, and for the purposes of today, I was only referring to them. Indeed, I could go and detail and narrate all the misdeeds of various self-appointed and elected representatives, Roma and non-Roma, who have cheated the populations. But this is not the purpose. The purpose is to show that there is an emancipatory promise in politics that we need to make sure does not get lost in the sort of the business of civil society projects, funding, the politics of EU structures. We need to recover. And again, it is, as you say, there are very many examples of practical everyday things that people do in their communities to make a difference to the lives of those close to them and those not so close to them. I've seen examples of everyday resilience in Roma communities, ingenuity, examples of good practice, where Roma have led the way in terms of, I know of many examples in terms of preventative healthcare for women. It is Romani women that led the way, that hosted the facilities and allowed for non-Romani women from excluded communities to access services. So I've seen much in way of agency in terms of practical responses to everyday challenges. But in the face of structural, what we need is a politics that makes all that add up to transformation and change. And we are the responsibility. So beyond the things we do in everyday life, there is a political responsibility that those who espouse progressive politics must make equality and ending discrimination central to their political project. It was mentioned here that left liberal parties don't want to talk about the border fences, don't want to talk about refugees, that it is hard to separate some of them from their right-wing counterparts. Well, that's an historical failure of nerve, ethical and moral responsibility on behalf of anyone who claims to be a social democrat. As long as they fail in their courage to stand up, then they will be forever compromised, and they compromise a wider progressive political project. So, yes, there are many practical things being done. Yes, politicians, Roma and non-Roma, are alike. We have those that have some integrity and we have those who have none. In that way, Roma and non-Roma are, there is little to separate us, except that the structures of power, and that when people do enter politics, if they are swallowed up or isolated, as Roma politicians, their capacity for agency is restricted. The struggle of black sections in the Labour Party of Britain went on for decades before black and ethnic minority people had something in terms of representation that reflected their interests, their priorities, their demands, and the recognition. So it is a long struggle, but the responsibility lies not solely, what I'm saying is not that it lies as has been done, the burden is put on seemingly on the shoulders of Roma politicians and public figures to make the change, where the real change needs to come from far more powerful structures. So those who have taken the courageous commitment, and that was the subset I was talking to, I have no time to speak to Farkas, Florian or others. I have no interest. What I was talking about were young Roma politicians who came from communities who had an opportunity their cousins, their siblings didn't have, and want to make a difference so that it's not pure luck, scholarships or something, but that it is something that their cousins, that their brothers, their sisters can have as well, by right and not by luck or by chance.
Before we,
I don't know if that answers...
Before we break for lunch, I will give Marius the final word, and he will answer this question.
Thank you, Elena, for raising this question. In my presentation, I raised this. I will closely and shortly answer to your question. Yes, Roma politicians, as non-Roma politicians, they have to be accountable to their voters. However, they pay in front of electorate, but it's our duty, and in meetings like that, we have to discuss to do our citizenship duties in making politicians accountable, both Roma and non-Roma, and to signalize them when and where they are doing mistakes. So this is one part of the answer. Second, you know that the politics of Roma, it also has the so-called tokenism approach. And when I'm saying tokenism, I'm using also the term of post-colonialism and also studies and the way how the subaltern will speak, as Spivak will say. On the other hand, there is a new term used by Huub van Baar, which it's using the so-called governability. I would add next to the governability, governable people. So there are the two dimensions that we can look at it. And indeed, sometimes institutions, they know what is the governability, and especially who are governable people. So we have to have in mind that the machinery is complex. And I'll close with a quote from Nicolae Gheorghe in regard with how to look at the institution and how tokenistic from institutions can be tackled by Roma. He told me like that in Roma in the institution they have to do 9 times like the politics of institution, and where is the art is to do 1 time out of 10 for Roma, but the strategy is when, for how price, and what political momentum you use. Otherwise, machineries they are going with or without Roma in. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you to both speakers and to all of the people that participated. And now I will wait for stage instructions. What happens next?
So,